But that single exchange captured live on Capitol Hill is exactly why Senator Jeff Merkley's questioning of FBI Director Kash Patel went viral within hours. Right after Patel claimed familiarity with the Fifth Amendment, Merkley dropped the hammer. "You haven't read the Constitution? It says all persons. I've got it right here." Patel left senators visibly stunned as he brushed off basic accountability questions about the Bureau's role in America's deportation crackdown. This wasn't just a gotcha moment, it exposed something far more disturbing. "I used to be before I started doing everything." As the first former public defender ever to lead the FBI, Patel should be a champion of due process. Instead, he appeared evasive and unprepared, unwilling to clearly affirm that the Constitution's core protections apply to everyone on American soil, including hundreds of immigrants swept off the streets and rapidly deported to El Salvador's notorious CICOT mega prison without hearings. What exactly is happening inside the FBI under Patel's watch? How does the man sworn to defend the Constitution seem this unfamiliar with its most basic promise? And why does this constitutional amnesia strike at the precise moment hundreds of people are being stripped of their rights? The answers that followed only get more disturbing. This isn't the first time Kash Patel has displayed serious inconsistency before Congress. Just hours earlier, he aggressively demanded another $1 billion for drug interdiction and anti-terrorism efforts. Yet, when the official budget landed, it proposed cutting $500 million. Caught in this stunning flip-flop, Patel didn't give a straight answer. Instead, he claimed he can't not support whatever gets handed to him because opposing it would mean supporting nothing at all. That's not leadership. That's a man trapped in his own contradictions, talking in circles. And this wasn't an isolated stumble. Senator Patty Murray slammed the FBI for failing to deliver its statutorily required FY25 spend plan to Congress over a week late, calling the delay really absurd. Basic deadlines and congressional backtime oversight apparently mean nothing to this director. But the real gut punch came when Merkley pressed harder. According to House Appropriations Committee releases, the administration's FY 2026 blueprint proposed slashing $545 million from the FBI. When asked point blank whether he wanted more money or less, Patel refused to commit. No clear number, no accountability, just more vague talk about filling gaps. That same refusal to give straight answers on the budget is exactly the same attitude that defined everything that followed, especially when the Constitution itself was on the line. What Kash Patel revealed in that hearing goes far beyond one awkward exchange. It exposes a deliberate and dangerous narrowing of constitutional protections at the very top of American law enforcement. Patel wasn't simply declining to comment on an ongoing matter. He explicitly told a United States senator that he didn't know whether the Fifth Amendment applies to the hundreds of immigrants swept off American streets and sent to El Salvador's notorious CCOT mega prison without individual hearings. The Fifth Amendment does not limit due process to citizens. For over a century, the Supreme Court has repeatedly affirmed that the phrase "any person in the Bill of Rights" applies to every human being on U.S. soil, citizens and non-citizens alike, from Yico v. Sidth. Hopkins in 1886 through Reno Vu, Flores and beyond, the law has been crystal clear. The government cannot simply grab people off the street, strip them of liberty, and ship them to a foreign prison without any process. Yet Patel's evasive answers effectively treated due process as optional when the targets are immigrants. As the first former public defender to lead the FBI, Patel should be its strongest champion of these rights. Instead, by refusing to acknowledge the FBI's role in investigating potential constitutional violations by other agencies, he is carving out a massive exemption. This isn't theoretical. Reports have documented cases where individuals with valid asylum claims, pending court dates, or even U.S. citizen family members were caught in these operations, including the high-profile wrongful deportation of Maryland resident Kilmar Abrego Garcia under the revived Alien Enemies Act of 1798, a case that required Supreme Court intervention. When the nation's top law enforcement officer treats the Constitution's most basic safeguard as negotiable, it sends a chilling signal to every other government agency. Constitutional corners can be cut as long as the political target is unpopular. That is precisely how precedents for abuse are quietly built, one refusal to investigate at a time. And with Patel still having months, possibly years left in the job, every American should be asking, how much further will this go? Person. This hearing between Senator Jeff Merkley and FBI Director Kash Patel did more than expose one difficult exchange. It revealed a deeper misalignment between the person leading America's premier law enforcement agency and the constitutional principles that agency exists to protect. Patel's defense followed a familiar pattern seen across multiple high-profile appearances this year. He first asserted superior awareness of due process compared to any previous director, then shifted responsibility by describing the deportations as simply a different branch of government. Merkley immediately highlighted the problem. If the FBI refuses to investigate potential constitutional violations simply because another agency carried them out, then no part of federal law enforcement remains accountable. That is not a narrow legal distinction. It is a broad exemption being created in real time. When pressed to make a clear commitment, Patel eventually stated that due process would be honored under his leadership, yet that assurance came only after repeated prompting and only after being reminded on the record of the plain text of the Constitution he swore to defend. For someone who entered the position emphasizing his background as a public defender, the exchange raised legitimate questions about consistency between past advocacy and current institutional responsibility. The broader significance lies in what this reveals about the current direction of the FBI. For decades, the Bureau's credibility has depended on two foundations: operational effectiveness against crime and terrorism, and consistent respect for constitutional boundaries. When those two foundations begin to drift apart, public confidence weakens. Career professionals inside the agency who have built their careers around careful adherence to legal standards now see their director treating one of the Constitution's core protections as something that can be handled on a case-by-case basis depending on the policy context. This moment stands out from earlier controversies because the position was stated openly before a congressional committee rather than through classified programs or after-act interpretations. By declining to affirm the FBI's role in examining potential violations of due process by other agencies, Patel effectively suggested that large-scale enforcement operations can operate in a zone where constitutional compliance is treated as optional. That message travels far beyond one hearing room. It reaches agents and field offices, officials in partner agencies, and judges who will eventually review these actions in court. The practical effects are already visible. Families have been separated during rapid operations. Individuals with pending asylum claims or court dates have been removed. In several documented instances, mistakes were only corrected after judicial intervention or later review. Each case represents not only a human story, but also an institutional failure if the FBI, the agency best positioned to investigate potential civil rights violations, chooses to stand aside. When courts later examine these operations, as they inevitably do, the absence of parallel FBI review leaves the Bureau appearing detached from its own constitutional oversight responsibilities. Congress retains important tools to address this. Through continued oversight hearings, targeted budget provisions, and statutory requirements for reporting, lawmakers can reinforce the expectation that due process is not discretionary for any federal agency. The judicial branch continues to serve as the ultimate check it has always been in American governance. However, these mechanisms work best when the executive branch's senior law enforcement official actively supports rather than sidesteps them. For everyday Americans, the lesson is straightforward. The Constitution was deliberately designed with safeguards because concentrated power tends to expand when left unchecked. Its protections are not reserved for popular causes or convenient moments. They are most important precisely when applied to groups with limited political influence. When those safeguards begin to be treated as flexible, the real issue is not whether the system will eventually correct course. The issue is how much precedent is established and how much trust is lost before correction occurs. Patel entered the role with a public commitment to restore integrity and focus to the FBI after years of controversy. This hearing, however, showed an agency still wrestling with fundamental questions about the scope of constitutional obligations. The gap between stated intentions and demonstrated performance is what makes the moment noteworthy. It is not simply about one set of answers on one afternoon in Washington. It is about whether the institution Patel leads will continue to be regarded as a consistent guardian of the rule of law, or whether it risks being perceived as selective in when and how it applies constitutional standards. Additional congressional review, ongoing litigation, and public scrutiny will provide further clarity in the months ahead. What remains to be seen is whether the FBI, under current leadership, will move decisively to reaffirm its role as a defender of constitutional boundaries across all enforcement activities, regardless of political context. Every American, regardless of background or political perspective, has an interest in the outcome. The Constitution does not belong to whichever party holds power at any given time. It belongs to the country as a whole. The central question this hearing leaves us with is whether we will continue to insist that its core protections apply equally, especially when doing so requires holding our own institutions accountable. That standard has served the nation through many challenges before, and it remains the surest foundation for public trust in law enforcement going forward. If this hearing raised important questions for you about leadership at the FBI and constitutional accountability, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. We will continue following these developments with detailed, fact-based reporting. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. What aspect of this exchange stood out most to you? We read every comment and often draw from them for future coverage. Thank you for watching.